The war in Europe had ended, but for thousands of captured soldiers and civilians, the journey was far from over. Among them were a small group of German women prisoners, of war nurses, clerks, and auxiliaries, who had served in various German units across France and Holland. After being transferred to British custody, they were now being transported across the Channel to England, unsure of what awaited them on the other side. The sea was calm that morning, but the mood on the transport ship was tense. Some women clutched small bags, the only belongings they had left. Others stood silently on the deck, staring at the waves as the white cliffs of Dover slowly appeared in the distance. For years, they had heard stories about Britain, how it was devastated by bombings, how its people lived in constant fear. But what awaited them was not destruction. It was something else entirely. As the ship docked at the British port, the women were startled by the sight before them. Long lines of British soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms clean, boots polished, and vehicles neatly parked in rows. Massive transport trucks, jeeps, and tanks rumbled in the distance. The discipline, the order, and the sheer power of the British military struck them deeply. One of the women, Anna Weiss, a 27-year-old former communications officer, whispered to her friend, "We were told they were barely holding on, but look at them. This is strength." Her voice trembled, a mix of awe and disbelief. The British officers maintained a respectful distance as they guided the prisoners off the ship. There were no angry shouts, no vengeful glares. The women were lined up for inspection, their names checked and their documents recorded. Everything was organized, calm, and efficient, so unlike what many had imagined. For months, these women had been living in chaos: bomb shelters, food shortages, and fear of Allied air raids. Now, standing on British soil, they were surrounded by the very enemy they had been taught to hate. And yet, they felt an unexpected sense of safety. A British sergeant, noticing their nervousness, spoke gently through an interpreter. "You'll be taken to a camp. You'll be treated fairly. No one here will harm you." His tone was steady, his expression serious but not cruel. As the convoy of military trucks began to move, the German women sat silently, gazing out of the canvas-covered backs. They passed through small English towns, where civilians paused to look at them not with hatred, but with curiosity. Children waved, women stared, and some men simply nodded, acknowledging that the war had finally brought strange guests to their land. For Anna and the others, the first day on British soil was a shock, not of violence or revenge, but of unexpected humanity and discipline. They had entered the land of their former enemy, and yet it felt more stable and powerful than they had ever imagined. And as the camp gates came into view, one thought echoed in their minds. What else had they been wrong about? September 1945. The English Channel lay beneath a gray sky, restless and cold, as the transport ship approached the coast of Britain. On its deck stood dozens of German women nurses, clerks, communications workers, and Red Cross aides, all bound for an uncertain future. The war had ended. The Reich had fallen, and the cities they once called home were now rubble. These women were not soldiers, but they had worn uniforms and served a cause that had crumbled to ash. And now, under British custody, they prepared to step into the land of their former enemy. As the ship slowed near the docks, an eerie silence spread among them. They expected anger, maybe even cruelty. German propaganda had painted the British as merciless victors, eager for revenge. But when the first British officers came into view, standing tall in crisp khaki uniforms, with polished boots and calm expressions, the women felt something unexpected: confusion. These men didn't look like brutes. They looked disciplined, focused, even humane. When the gangway was lowered, the order to disembark came in perfect English, polite, clear, and controlled. The women hesitated, clutching their few belongings. Then, one officer, his voice steady but gentle, said, "You are safe now. Please proceed, one at a time." Those simple words shattered many of their fears. No shouting, no rifles raised, just quiet authority. Once ashore, they were escorted to military trucks parked in neat rows. The vehicles gleamed despite the drizzle, their engines humming in perfect rhythm. Every movement, every command, reflected a kind of precision the women had never seen, not even in the strict German army. The British soldiers didn't show off their power, they embodied it. Their calmness was their strength. As the convoy rolled through the countryside, the women stared out the windows in stunned silence. Britain was supposed to be starving, devastated by bombings. Instead, they saw life, green fields, working factories, tidy villages, untouched by chaos. The sight hit harder than any weapon. "They told us the British were finished," whispered one young woman named Annalise. "But look around. Does this look finished to you?" At the camp, order reigned. Wooden barracks stood in perfect rows. Guards saluted smartly, and even the kitchens smelled of fresh bread. No one yelled, no one threatened. When one woman stumbled, a British soldier helped her up, saying, "Steady there, miss." The small act of kindness broke her composure. She whispered, "They treat us better than our own officers did." That night, lying on a clean cot beneath a borrowed blanket, Flessel, a nurse from Berlin, stared through the window at the Union Jack fluttering outside. "They conquered us," she murmured, "but not with hate." And for the first time, the defeated felt something they hadn't in years: respect. The morning after their arrival, the camp awoke to the sound of boots striking the gravel crisp, measured, unwavering. The German women peeked through the narrow windows of their barracks. Outside, a company of British soldiers marched in formation, rifles gleaming under the pale sun. There was no shouting, no chaos, just synchronized movement, every step echoing the same truth. This was a nation that hadn't broken. For years, Nazi propaganda had hammered one message into their minds: that Britain was weak, its empire crumbling, its people desperate. Yet here they were, staring at the opposite of collapse. Even in victory, these soldiers carried themselves with quiet dignity, not arrogance. They didn't boast about triumph. They simply embodied control. During morning roll call, a British officer addressed them with the same tone one might use with civilians. "You will be treated fairly," he said, "so long as you follow camp rules." His voice wasn't threatening. It was steady, like a teacher instructing children after a storm. The interpreter translated, but most of the women already understood enough English to grasp the meaning. The message wasn't dominance. It was order. Breakfast followed. Their astonishment, it wasn't watery soup or spoiled bread like the rations back home. Each woman received porridge, butter, jam, and tea, real tea, steaming and fragrant. Some wept quietly, spooning it with trembling hands. "Even prisoners eat better here," whispered Marta, a 22-year-old clerk who hadn't seen fresh food in weeks. The British cooks didn't mock their tears. They just nodded politely and carried on. That same afternoon, a training drill took place near the fence line. The women gathered at the windows again, mesmerized. British soldiers moved like clockwork, rifles raised and lowered in perfect rhythm. Shouts of command cutting clean through the air. When a truck backfired nearby, no one flinched. Their discipline wasn't forced. It was instinct. An older woman, once a propaganda typist in Hamburg, murmured bitterly, "Our newsreels showed them as lazy cowards. Look at them now." Silence followed. No one argued. The truth was marching right before their eyes. At dusk, when the camp settled into routine, some of the women were invited to assist with medical duties in the infirmary. British medics treated them not as enemies, but as nurses, fellow caretakers of human life. One officer even thanked a German woman, Clara, for her help with a wounded British private. She didn't know how to respond. Gratitude from the enemy felt heavier than chains. That night, as the floodlights flickered across the compound, Clara whispered to Liesel, "They won the war not because they were stronger, but because they never lost themselves." Liesel nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time since capture, fear began to fade, replaced by something unexpected, something they couldn't yet name. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the first fragile seed of understanding. Weeks turned into months. What began as fear and bitterness slowly transformed into quiet respect. The German women learned English phrases from their guards, shared songs during work hours, and even exchanged family stories. The British soldiers, though disciplined, began to see beyond the uniforms. They saw daughters, sisters, women who had also lost everything to the madness of war. One frosty morning, a British officer gathered the women and announced their repatriation. The war was truly over. Ships would soon take them back to Germany. For a long moment, no one spoke. Home. The word felt foreign now. The Britain they had feared had shown them not cruelty, but humanity. As they boarded the trucks to the port, the soldiers lined up to bid farewell. One of the women, Clara, paused and looked back at the camp one last time. Her eyes met those of a British sergeant who had once guarded her barrack door. He raised his hand in salute, not of victory, but of respect. She returned it, her throat tightening. As the trucks rumbled away, the women carried more than memories. They carried a truth that no propaganda could erase. That strength wasn't in hatred or conquest, but in mercy and restraint. Years later, Clara would tell her grandchildren, "In captivity, I saw real power, not in weapons, but in how our enemies treated us." And with that, the war finally ended. Inside her heart,